Hi, Pastor John here from St. Matthew and the Hope Center with another word for the week. I wonder if you've ever heard of the HFC, the Hmong Fellowship Church. Not the Hmong Baptist Church here in Appleton, but the Hmong Fellowship Church in Vietnam. Because their story is almost like it's right out of the Bible. Back in the 1990s, some leaders in Vietnam villages started to watch online the gospel, and they were brought to faith. And so they shared the message with their villagers, and more people were brought to faith. More people were watching those online messages. But then the communist government caught wind of it. And those village leaders were forced into hard labor. In fact, guns were held at their heads, telling them to renounce their faith or else. Well, they refused to renounce their faith, and the soldiers didn't follow through, and so life went on. In fact, Christianity spread so much in Vietnam and Cambodia that finally the communist government gave up. And then 30 years later, our Wisconsin Synod got involved. In fact, we were able to finish a seminary to train pastors back in 2023. And 55 pastors from the Hmong Fellowship Church graduated there in order to go out to the over 100,000 followers that they have in Vietnam today. Kind of illustrates how God's authority continues to work over and above even the authorities that are against it here in this world. I think that's a difficult Bible truth for us to believe and to accept, that God would actually put into authorities here, government powers, people over us in industry, that would persecute Christians or even kill them. But that's what he does. In fact, the story of Jesus before Pilate, I think, helps us to understand and how wonderfully and powerfully God is at work in spite of the authorities here in this world that might be against him. As Jesus stood there before Pontius Pilate was in the worst way trying to free him. But of all things, Jesus, by his authority as God, wouldn't allow that to happen. In fact, Jesus told him the truth that he was going, Pilate that is, was going to send Jesus to the cross against Pilate's wishes so that Jesus would be crucified. And that's the way it turned out. Jesus, God's authority, won out. He was crucified on the cross, even though Jesus was the prisoner. And Pilate's authority was overcome even as he gave the condemnation orders to send Jesus to the cross, so that Jesus died, so that Jesus could save us, so that Jesus and God could bless us with their authority in spite of the authorities that are working against God and against us. And I think that's such an important truth for you to tuck away into your life, because what's going to happen? We're going to have sometimes government run amok working against us, maybe especially as Christians, or it might be the health industry or insurance or your employer, making those rules that are going against you, making your life hard. And what do you do in cases like that? You accept the authority that God has put in place by his authority, trusting all the while that by your obedience to God and to earthly authorities, that God is going to bless you. In fact, Jesus rose and lives over those authorities finally to bring about his blessing in ways that you and I could never imagine. Because as believers, he makes us part of his kingdom. He makes us citizens under the authority in this world, but ultimately under his authority as God to bless and to save. I'm hoping that I can share more of this message with you at our Wednesday morning worship starting at 10 o'clock You can tune in here or even come to our service or really find us on YouTube anytime after that. God bless.